Another thing is that I think one must mention as being central to Locke is his very special use of the word ideas.
Yes.
I know he didn't coin that, but he, in chapter 1 of the essay concerning human understanding, he actually apologizes to the reader for the frequency with which he's going to use the word in the book. Can you say something about that?
Yes, well, it was, in fact, a very well-used term by the time he used it. I mean, there's nothing really new about it at all. But for Locke, an idea is something very different from what it is for Descartes. For Descartes, it's something really fundamentally intellectual. For Locke, it's fundamentally something sensory. I mean, even if we're thinking about something that we're not actually perceiving, we have an image, a sensory image of that thing. And he explains even the most abstract thinking in these terms. Of course, his theory has to get more complicated at this point, but basically, thought is for him the possession, having of images before the mind. Now, this theory of imagism, as we could call it, was not an uncommon one in the 17th century, and it had tended to go in one of two directions. One of these directions is taken by Hobbes, that since all our knowledge and understanding was dependent on the senses, Hobbes produced a dogmatic view of the world, which was a materialist one. He thought that we could analyze experience in such a way that we could arrive at the sort of understanding of the world that Descartes thought we arrived at through the intellect. But Locke developed a different line which is more agnostic or skeptical, really, that although the senses give us knowledge, they give us a limited knowledge. And because all our thought about the world is restricted to the concepts that we have through the senses, and in fact our thought involves sensory images, that restricts our knowledge of the world. And he thought there was no method by which we could arrive at the underlying nature of things. So he was a sort of modified skeptic. I mean, we know the world is there, but we don't know what it's like.
Yes. This use of the word ideas and this particular theory of knowledge was so influential that I'd like to dwell on it just for a moment. And Locke thought, didn't he, that everything that was present to the mind was, in his sense of the word, an idea. And he used that to mean not just thoughts,
yes,
as we tend to do, but
yes,
sensory images, even memories, pains, emotions.
Yes.
Everything immediately present to the mind was an idea.
Yes.
Now, when it came to our apprehension of the external world, he thought that we didn't have direct access to objects. I mean, if I look at that table, I haven't got that table inside my head. What
No.
I've got inside my head is a visual image of that table. The light shines from the table onto the retina of my
Yes.
eye. That transmits an image to my brain, and I have the experience that I call seeing the table. But the whole of my experience, through all five of my senses, consists not of being in immediate contact with the objects of the external world, but of having images and representations of them. Now,
Yes.
he never doubted, did he, that although that means that the objects of the external world out there are things of which I do not have and never can have immediate knowledge, he never doubted that they were out there, did he? I mean, he believed that there were material substances out there in the world giving me these experiences. Why was he sure of that?
Well, he thought it just didn't make sense to suppose that all there is, so to speak, a lot of sensible qualities. I mean, his model is that, there is the object there, it's affecting us in various ways, and it's affecting other objects around it. And it's through its effects on us and through its perceptible effects on other objects, that's to say, the objects in turn affect us in regular ways. That's how we have knowledge of this thing. And so what for us is simply, we have to think of simply in terms of a sort of list of sensible qualities and powers to affect other things and so forth. What's actually there is something really rather simple. But he believed that because he believed the world must make sense. He believed that the world is an intelligible place, that it is governed by necessary laws, and that it's ultimately the kind of place that an ideal science could explain and understand. Now, at the level of sense perception, although there are regularities, they're only relative regularities. I mean, we don't get that kind of absolute law-likeness at the level of ordinary experience that that would be the sign that we had arrived at the truth of things. It's because we don't have a simple, comprehensive science, really, of things, that he can be sure that the senses don't give us knowledge of their nature.
Now, you say that Locke believed that the world was the sort of place that a law-like science could explain, but
Yes.
I think the question still needs to be asked. If he thought that all the knowledge we have of things is this intermediate knowledge, that we immediately experience images and sensations and representations, which in turn represent or picture the
Yes.
things, if we never have access to the things, how is a successful science possible on Locke's view? How can we know what the nature of things is?
Well, in a certain level, it's not possible, because we can never be sure, he thought, in his situation, at any rate, in the 17th century. I mean, he was really trying to prick a lot of balloons, so to speak. I mean, he was trying to cut the pretensions of philosophers like Descartes, who thought that they really arrived at a deductive science of things. What we're restricted to, in Locke's view, is speculation. And we're not only are we restricted to speculation, but we must employ in that speculation concepts that we get from experience. So there was, in Locke's view, a very good speculation to hand, but there was clearly something wrong with it, and that was Boyle's view of the world as a whole lot of little atoms, particles, bouncing around and clinging together and functioning mechanically. And he thought that's what the world must be like. That it would be Boyle's explanation of chemical change, for example. That if we take a chemical substance and we see that it behaves in a whole variety of different ways in different conditions, then Boyle said, well, that's not because it just, so to speak, has an arbitrary and contingent list of powers to affect other things in various ways, but because it has a certain structure, a certain mechanical structure, and because when it meets things of different varying mechanical structures, then obviously it's going to behave in different ways when it interacts with these things. Now, Locke accepted that view provisionally, but he thought there were certain questions it left unanswered. One of the questions concerned the particles themselves. I mean, why do atoms cohere as little unchanging things? It's all very well if you postulate them and then get on from there, but why isn't it the case that when one atom hits another, it doesn't fall apart or bits fall off and so forth? So the problem of coherence was one of the problems that he raised. Newton's Principia had been published just a few years before the essay, and, of course, the inverse square law is an important part of Newton's system.
I think I'd better mention what that is, because some of our viewers might not know, and that is that every object in the universe attracts every other object in the universe with a force which is inversely proportional to the square of the distance between them. That's
yes.
it.
Yes.
Sorry,
well, I mean,
just an interruption, guy. I think one mustn't assume that everybody knows this.
Locke accepted that Newton had shown that this law holds, and he accepted that the probability was that it holds absolutely universally.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, it seemed to Locke just like a kind of brute fact, and not a really intelligible one in itself.
What science is explaining is not the inner nature of things, which we can't know, but how things behave, which we can observe, which we can experience.
He thought that that's what, in the end, that's what Newton had achieved, a sort of spectacularly good description of how things behave. Yeah. And this interpretation was one that Newton himself was inclined to.
Yes,
and in fact, in the second edition of Principia, he published after Locke's death, he introduced a number of philosophical passages which were pretty obviously heavily influenced by Locke.
Yes, he said this famous phrase, "I don't make hypotheses."
That's right.
Hypotheses non fingo,
right.
And he was referring to that, wasn't he?
Exactly.
I just tell you that there is gravity. I don't try to explain how it comes about there is gravity, and so on for the whole of his science.
Yes.